I was 24 when I moved to Whitby, a small fishing town on the northeast coast of England. My parents lived in York, but I didn't want to be right in the city. Whitby was about an hour's train ride away, rent was cheaper, and it had that quiet charm that I thought would be good for a fresh start. Money was tight, so I needed work fast. I'd been job hopping for months, never quite landing anywhere. 3 days after moving in, I spotted a listing for a family-owned grocery shop called Mason's Market. I'd never heard of it before, but I'd done grocery work back in school, so I applied. Within hours, a man named Mr. Mason called. He barely asked questions before saying, "You're hired." No interview, no references, nothing. On the phone, his voice was calm but off, like there was something he was trying too hard to mask. The only downside? It was for the night shift. I'd never worked nights before, but with so few options, I accepted. My first shift started on a Thursday. I left my flat at 9:15 p.m., walking down the foggy main street toward the store. By the time I arrived, the lights inside were dim and the car park was empty. Mason was waiting at the glass doors, staring straight at me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and a thick beard. He unlocked the doors without a word, just smiling in this strange, fixed way as I stepped inside. He led me through the shop to a cramped office in the back to sign paperwork. The aisles we passed looked neglected. Shelves dusty, tiles cracked, lighting too yellow. Not the kind of place you linger in. As we filled in forms, Mason asked me casual things, until it wasn't so casual. He wanted to know if I lived alone, who brought me to work, if anyone was picking me up. I gave vague answers. The smile never left his face. When we finally got to work, he showed me an aisle stacked with boxes and left me to it. An hour passed quietly, until I noticed him, standing at the end of the aisle, watching me, not walking past, not saying a word, just standing there. I'd look up, and he'd turn away. Then 20 minutes later, he'd be back again the same way. Around 1:50 a.m., he appeared once more. This time, he started walking toward me with that unsettling grin. "How about a break? Long night, isn't it?" I followed him, thinking we'd go to a staff room, but he led me to a heavy steel door behind the warehouse. He pushed it open, and the cold night air hit me. Behind the shop was a small service yard, empty except for a single car parked near the loading dock. As soon as we stepped out, that car's headlights flared on, and it slowly drove away into the mist. Mason lit a cigarette and leaned against the wall. I stood a couple feet away, eyes fixed on the dark tree-line beyond the yard, but I could feel his gaze on me unblinking. After maybe a minute, the same car rolled back around the corner, slowly, then pulled right up to where we stood. I glanced at Mason, expecting some acknowledgement, maybe a, "Do you know them?" But he didn't even look at the car. His eyes stayed locked on me, cold and flat now, the smile gone. Something in my gut told me this was a setup. Before the car fully stopped, I slipped through the steel door and hurried down the warehouse hall toward the office. My bag, my keys, my phone. When I got there, they were gone. My jacket too. Everything I'd brought and had vanished. That's when I heard footsteps, more than one set, coming from both directions. I bolted, out through the front doors, down the deserted street, heart hammering in my throat. The only lit place nearby was a petrol station about a 10-minute sprint away. I burst in, shaking, and begged the attendant to call the police. When officers arrived, they searched the shop. My bag and jacket were right there in the office, neatly placed as if they'd never moved. Mason claimed I'd left them there the whole time, and that no one had pulled up outside. The back camera, conveniently offline. Nothing could be proven, so that was the end of it. I moved out of Whitby the next day, and stayed with my parents until I could find something safer. I still don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed out there in that yard. But I do know this, if your gut tells you something's wrong, listen to it. It might save your life.
Are you a horror lover, craving something real? For just $2, dive into over 30 plus true and unique horror stories, each one different, each one unforgettable. Every story comes with a chilling visual in the background to pull you deeper into the terror. This isn't your average creepypasta. It's raw, suspenseful, and one of a kind. Get your ebook now, if you dare.
Back in the winter of 2022, I was working my regular job in Manchester, but the bills kept piling up. One night, I decided to finally try a side hustle I'd signed up for weeks earlier, food delivery. I'd been approved to work through the app, but I'd kept putting it off. That night, I came home from work, too restless to sleep. It was just after 9 p.m. when I grabbed my phone, logged in, and started taking orders. The first few runs were simple, quick pickups, friendly customers, nothing unusual. But about 3 hours in, a new order popped up that was different. The tip was huge, somewhere between 25 pounds and 30 pounds. That was nearly what I'd made in my first 3 hours combined. Without thinking twice, I accepted it. It was from the only 24-hour McDonald's in town, the one out on the A666 highway, the road that cuts out of Manchester and heads deep into rural Lancashire. Once I picked up the order, I noticed my destination was nowhere near a main neighborhood. The GPS line on my phone stretched straight into the countryside. I was less than 2 minutes into the drive when my phone rang. It was the customer. His voice was low, older than mine, maybe mid-30s, but there was something off about his tone. Not angry exactly, just tense. He asked me to confirm the address. I read it off. Silence. Before I could ask if it was correct, he hung up. No thank you. No see you soon. Just dead air. The drive out there felt long. The road kept pulling me away from town, past empty fields and scattered houses. There was a thick fog, the kind that makes the headlights feel useless. My stomach knotted for no reason I could explain. Eventually, the GPS told me to turn off onto a dirt track. The tall grass on either side hid whatever was ahead. My tires crunched slowly over the gravel until through the fog, a house emerged, an old farmhouse with peeling paint and a wraparound porch. The address matched. Lights glowed in the windows, but the place felt wrong. Too still. I grabbed the bag of food and stepped toward the porch. The only sound was the wind brushing through the grass. Not even the hum of a television inside. When I knocked, the door swung open slightly, like it hadn't been closed all the way. From somewhere deep inside, a man's voice called out, the same one from the phone. "You the delivery driver?" I said yes, and offered to leave his food on the porch. "No," he said quickly. "Put it on the kitchen counter." He didn't sound friendly or up close. If anything, he sounded impatient. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was stale and smelled of old wood. Then, from the back of the house, music started, an old piano tune, loud and jarring. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. Something in me screamed to leave, but I kept walking toward what I thought was the kitchen. The hallway narrowed, the light fading as I approached the darker end of the house. That's when I stopped. I dropped the bag on the floor and turned back toward the door, only to freeze. The man was standing just a couple of feet away in the shadows, blocking my way out. I could barely make out his face, but I'll never forget the wide-eyed stare, and the way the whites of his eyes caught the dim light. In that instant, I felt like I'd interrupted something. I think he was holding something in his hands, but I never looked long enough to see what. Before he could move, I bolted past him, out the door, and into my car. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, the fog swallowing the house behind me. Later, I realized what he'd been doing, blasting the music to cover the sound of his footsteps as he crept toward the door to lock me in. That was my last delivery shift. I deleted the app the moment I got home. If there's a lesson here, it's this. Trust the feeling that tells you something's wrong. You might only get one chance. I was 29 when this happened. I just moved to Kingston, Ontario, a place I never planned on living, but my old job in Toronto had let me go, and this was where rent was cheapest. At first, I had no plan, no direction. I told myself I'd take any work I could, just to keep busy while I figured things out. After a couple weeks of searching, I landed a night clerk position at a tiny roadside motel off Highway 15, about half an hour outside the city. It sat alone in the dark, next to a boarded-up diner that hadn't been open in years. The first 2 nights were training shifts, but this story happened on my first night working alone. By 9 p.m., the trickle of guests had slowed. Most were tired drivers looking for somewhere to crash. But one woman stood out, mid-30s, hair a mess, constantly glancing over her shoulder. She spoke fast, barely making eye contact, paid in cash, and disappeared into her room at the far end of the building. For the next hour, I just sat at the counter, staring out at the empty highway. That's when a man walked in. I hadn't seen or heard a car pull up. He looked like he'd been walking for miles, pale, lanky, with dull, heavy eyes. "How much for a room?" he asked. I told him we had plenty available and asked if he wanted to check in. He hesitated, but kept glancing over my shoulder. Then he shook his head. "No thanks." He turned and walked out. Curious, I looked back to see what had caught his eye. The only thing behind me was the key wall, a rack of labeled hooks holding actual metal keys. This place was old-fashioned. No key cards, no computerized locks. I expected to see his car leave, but minutes passed and nothing moved in the lot. The highway was empty. I stepped outside, scanning the area, nothing. He was just gone. Half an hour later, the desk phone rang, jolting me. The call was from the woman's room at the far end. Her voice trembled. "Someone's standing outside my door. He won't leave." I rushed outside. By the time I reached her room, there was no one there. She opened the door just enough for me to see her pale face and darting eyes. She said she'd seen him standing at her window, silent, unmoving. When she described him, my stomach sank. It was the same man from earlier. I asked if she wanted me to call the police, but she shook her head quickly. "No, I'm leaving tomorrow. I just need the night." I went back to the desk. The hours dragged, but I couldn't shake the image of him standing there. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard a loud crash. It sounded like furniture slamming against walls, echoing through the whole building. I ran toward the noise and found her door wide open. Inside, the man had her backed into a corner. His face was twisted with rage, his bloodshot eyes locked on her. I yelled. He spun around and charged toward me. But instead of attacking, he bolted past, sprinted across the highway, and disappeared into the black line of trees on the other side. She was shaking, but unhurt. I called 911. That's when I learned the truth. She'd lied earlier. The man was her ex-husband. She'd been hiding from him for weeks. He'd found her somehow, and when she'd seen him outside her room earlier, she'd hoped ignoring it would make him go away. When I checked the key wall later, one hook was empty. The spare to her room was gone. I still don't know if he planned to hurt her or just scare her. But I do know this: the quietest nights can change in a heartbeat. I stayed at that job for a few more months, but every time the desk phone rang late at night, I'd get that same cold feeling in my gut.